The stories that you have put out are amazing, but it's also amazing that
And
they,
yours.
and it's also amazing that they actually get to print or to air. And so what I'd like to hear some more about, and probably later on as well, is the process of convincing editors that you should stick with something. Like you have a 9-part series that covered 6 months. I can't imagine that it was an immediate yes. And
they said 9 parts. So I was like,
and when you couldn't make headway with anyone on the reservation, and you knew there was a story there, you had to convince not just your editor, but I know the levels. So so if you could say a bit more about how did you get your higher powers to stick with you?
And especially when we were working on this story, we started it, and then a couple months later got a new editor, a new managing editor, and everybody all moved around, and so we were really nervous. The great thing was that the new editor, the new managing editor, and the new person right below them happened to all be women. And so we went from having, no offense to any middle-aged men in the room, but we went from having 2 middle-aged, men who were just in the business for a long time and really didn't care about these kind of stories. In fact, one of them told me that I needed to stop doing stories about mopes. And so, I was just like, geez, how's this going to go over with Tom? But then we got these other people, and they were very, very, very encouraging. But even we didn't know where it was going to go. It kind of fell into place. And I mean, to me, 9 days seemed like a heck of a lot of time too. But we wanted to keep all the stories readable and kind of shorter. So I mean, if you look at the final inch count, maybe it's a little different than you'd think. Plus, at the same time, we're doing all this online stuff, but the thing that really got us, the way they got us in giving us the 9 days was that we had all this time to tell the story, but we didn't have that long to do it. So they decided was it the very end of July, beginning of August, the story ran in September, mid-September, that rather than waiting till everything was over and writing the story, we were going to write the whole story and run it in the days leading up to the sentencing, which I have to say, I mean, I initially really argued against because it just scared the crap out of me of how are we going to write this all and let it run almost in real time up into this huge event. The big thing is when everyone's teaching you about writing, and the Stuart Warner, who is our writing coach and a wonderful editor, was always telling you about, once you know the ending, you can write the story, and how great it is to know that arc. And I kept kind of freaking out going, I don't know where it ends. I don't know what the arc is. I don't know how to tell a story. I changed my mind 15 times about what was going to go where and how are we going to do it, because we didn't know what was going to happen. We didn't know if Juan was going to go to jail. We didn't know if he was going to even plead guilty while we're writing these stories. So as nervous as she was, obviously, about how everything was going to go, I felt like, oh crap, I'm nervous about how everything's going to go, and how is this going to work out? And I remember one instance where we were using a lot of Joanna's writing the story because she wrote poems before this happened, while she was dating Juan, after it happened. And we had been talking, and I ended the day 8 with the first 2 lines of a poem. She'd been working on the poem. She was thinking about reading it, and finished the story with that. And I remember thinking, well, great, now she's going to think she has to read the poem, and what if she doesn't, and so I'm sitting there with her going, just because I wrote in the story that you're writing a poem doesn't mean you have to read it. Because I'm trying to go back and forth going, I don't want to force her into a spot where she has to read this poem if she doesn't want to read it, just because I put it in the paper that she was going to read it, and everybody read it, 2 days before. So there was all those concerns that we had about it, and then both of us trying to take something that we had spent, I mean, we didn't have that long to write the story. We had like 3 weeks, which is not a long time for something with all that. But then to turn around and do the final story in 3 hours and try to give it just as much, energy and attention and everything in a day where we had just sat through a horrible, horrible judge who kept what should have been a 25-minute hearing, turned it into 4 or 5 hours. I mean, had a cop waving around a gun, had people testifying at a hearing where none of that needed to happen. And the only reason he did that is because 2020 showed up. And he wanted to get his, 30 seconds of fame. So we're doing all that. And like Gus said, Grandma this was like the first time she really, really told everybody in sequence everything that happened. And just the tenor of her voice as she's speaking in Spanish to Juan, the boy at the table. I mean, I couldn't get it out of my head. I'm trying to write the story, and I'm just going, couldn't. It just was over and over and over again. But we had to like push that aside and get it all done. So, but the editors at the Plain Dealer were definitely very supportive, and we had a really great team of people who I wish could be here that helped out so much. I mean, from Dale O'Mori, who helped with all of our online stuff, everything down to our designer, Emmett Smith, who just, I mean, he read the first drafts of the stories, and that's one thing that a couple other journalists have told me is absolutely insane. Gus, Jeff Green, the photo editor, Stuart Warner, Dale O'Mori, the online guy, Bill Neff, who did the graphics, and Emmett all read literally the first draft of the story, and a lot of reporters were like, why would you do that? And I said, because they all needed to be on board, and we all needed to be in the same place to make it work. And I would absolutely do that again, whereas a lot of people would never want someone to see their raw, crappy kind of, writing, but I think it helped us all, mobilize ourselves to get it done, and the editors as well.
Laura, did you have a sales job?
My policy generally is to start small and say, well, we're just going to go out there and do a little story about this thing. I'm going to come out and report it. Don't worry about it too much. And then just like, kind of hook them in the more you get, like the more they get involved. And then, kind of give them the juicy tidbits every now and again. And then all of a sudden it's like, you've got the fishing rod and they're coming in. And then before you know it, they're on board and you're on board and you can travel anywhere you want and go for it. And that generally works really well.
Yeah, I think that our story was very much the same way in that we kind of, we weren't squirreled in the back room, working on this thing. Every time we would go out to do something, an event that Johanna was doing, we would put new and fresh photos out there for people to see. And so they saw this story develop. It wasn't something that was kind of like, we're going to spring this on you. People knew what was coming. And I think that helped to kind of sell the story. I mean, because, running 9 days for one story, I mean, it had better darn well be
We were
pretty
so
good story.
tired of it by the time it was over.
Yeah.
But the other thing too is, I don't know how this happened, but I mean, I covered juvenile court and children and family services, and I was not off my beat when this story, when we were reporting the story, except for the 3 weeks we were writing. So in between, as I'm hanging out with Joanna and just trying to get a couple minutes with her, after she's doing her schoolwork, and we would get in the car and drive around and go to the park, we had a school shooting and a police officer killed by a young person and all that stuff, which I still had to cover. So it was really, really crazy. And I would keep going to these people going, we really could just use a little more time to spend with Joanna. And so eventually it kind of got to that point, but it wasn't right away. They were just kind of like, oh, are you going to go do that for a couple hours?
No,
like,
never tell your editors what your real plan is. That's just general policy, and you just, if you can't get your editor hooked in after like little bits, you maybe should take a look at your story sometimes. But yeah, it's just, you just gotta work them like a source sometimes,